lost some people, but we haven't gained anyone new. Now, this panel is in relation to data.
Your voice isn't coming through very well.
Is that better?
Not really.
I'm talking about data. Oh, that's very clear. That's too clear.
Sorry?
I think that's clear.
Not as good as it can be, but anyway. Have we dialed, or turned the relevant dial? We have, haven't we?
This panel is in relation to data in out-of-home care. In its work, the Royal Commission has identified that there are inadequacies in the collection of data about out-of-home care, to such an extent that there is presently no accurate or nationally accessible information about child sexual abuse in out-of-home care. This lack of nationally consistent data set means that even basic statistics, such as a reliable figure for the prevalence of child sexual abuse in out-of-home care, cannot be ascertained. Without quality data, it is impossible to identify or predict emerging trends or accurately measure the effectiveness of programs aimed at preventing and responding to child sexual abuse in out-of-home care. One of the recommendations in the National Framework for Protecting Australia's Children 2009 to 2020 was that there be consistency in the collection of national child protection data. As part of its work, the Royal Commission has identified 6 points which it says should be present in a data set. There will be evidence from each of the governments today about what they have done in this regard. So can I start with you, Ms Bennett? There was, as I understand it, in 2009, a COAG endorsement of the national framework, and there was a recommendation that there be consistency in collection of child protection data. That's right, isn't it?
Yes, that is.
And also in that year, the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare commenced a 5-year project with states and territories to establish a child protection national minimum data set.
Yes.
And that work has been overseen by a Children and Families Data Network, which is a subcommittee of the CAFS, which is an acronym for what?
Child and Families Secretaries Group.
Thank you. And do you chair that, Mr Coutts-Trotter?
My colleague Emma White is the chair now.
Thank you. Now, Ms Bennett, can I ask you what, since 2009, has occurred in relation to establishing a child protection national minimum data set?
The national framework indicators under the National Framework for Protecting Australian Children, the indicators were designed to measure the progress against a number of outcomes which focus on whether the general population of Australian children and young people are safe. The framework includes some national standards, which I'll refer to in a bit more detail, and where they relate to children in out-of-home care. These indicators focus on children aged younger than 18 and whose care arrangements were ordered through the Children's Court, or where parental responsibility for the child or young people was transferred to the Minister or the Chief Executive, which in our view probably closely approximates the population of out-of-home care. Under the national framework, there were a number of supporting outcomes which are measured, in particular indicator 6.1, which is sexual abuse substantiations, the proportion of children 0 to 17 who were subject to child protection substantiation for sexual abuse, and 6.2, which is child sexual assault, the rate of children aged between 0 and 14 who've been the victims of sexual assault, drawing on ABS recorded crime victims collection. Under the national standards for out-of-home care, there is one standard which has an indicator that relates to abuse of children in out-of-home care, but it's not specific about sexual abuse. The Institute of Health and Welfare, whom we've also had some discussions with in relation to the Royal Commission's proposed model for sexual abuse in out-of-home care, the model has a greater level of detail than is currently collected.
Sorry, when you say the model...
Proposed by the Royal Commission.
You're referring to the 6-point plan, is that right?
Yes.
Thank you. Perhaps we might have that up on the screen. So, as I understand what you've just said, Ms Bennett, what the Royal Commission has said would improve the quality of data and set out the proposed model of the 6 points. What you're saying is that is not at this stage captured.
The Institute of Health and Welfare, whom I understand, Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, which I'll just call AIHW, may be in some discussions with you or is going to be in some discussions with the Commission. And so I'm drawing on advice that we received. That the first bit is that the data that's collected is at the moment against the measures that we have, and sort of share about having an understanding of what's happening nationally is it's not an individually collected data. It draws on other administrative sources across state governments and the Commonwealth, and it draws how you measure what that framework or the evidence that was available that's been referred under the national framework. And the purpose of that was to look, really to be able to have a whole of system across jurisdictions, understanding of what's happening and where there are areas of improvement. The model that you have up on the screen is a much more, I suppose, a unique identifier, in fact, personalised collection of data. And the core elements of that ranging from a unit record data file to include things like the date of the incident, the date of the report, the location where the incident took place, the relationship of the perpetrator, and then descriptors both of the child and the perpetrator, and disaggregation by placement type will require, according to the Institute, will take some time to develop the data fields and the mechanisms to collect it, because you'll be drawing on police information, you'll be drawing information collected by the various jurisdictions, and it may not even be within a single agency. So the architecture to collect that information, to assemble that, will take some time. The Institute could talk to you about the technical ways in which that would be done, what the array of information that states already have that could be pulled into it, but there are some other areas that are not being collected and you'd have to start a collection basis.
Is it the position of your department that the proposed data model is one that should be implemented, taking into account the period of time you spoke of and perhaps the technical issues which the Institute can tell us about later?
I don't feel in a position yet to offer a view on that. I think that's something that would have to be agreed between the jurisdictions through the ministerial meeting or through COAG, and that hasn't come out as a final recommendation from the Royal Commission yet. So I think that we're looking at it and we've looked at what the implications are, but we certainly have not with the Commonwealth, with our state colleagues or counterparts, been able to come to a definitive, is this the direction everybody wants to, and what would it mean to implement it?
Perhaps if I can ask the states whether or not they, firstly, in principle, agree to the fact that there is insufficient data and there needs to be more in relation to children in out-of-home care and sexual abuse. Does anyone disagree with that proposition?
No.
No? So the next question is, what data do we need? What's on the screen is a proposed data model, which I understand you've all seen before. Perhaps if I can start with you, Mr Coutts-Trotter, leaving aside the technical issue of an IT system,
Yep.
and leaving for the moment aside the different organisations that may need to be involved in capturing it, and looking at it from a principled point of view, Is that the sort of data that you believe is necessary?
Yes, it is, and we share the Commission's view that it is a significant gap in our ability, both within New South Wales and nationally, to determine whether children for whom the state has accepted the deepest responsibility, children taken into care, whether they are safe from abuse and whether that situation is improving or worsening. So we wholly agree with it. We have made changes to our own data capturing system that do enable us now for the 15-16 year and the 16-17 year to capture almost without exception the data that we see in these 6 points. The one challenge for us at present is where a child discloses a sexual abuse that happened prior to them coming into care. We capture the date of the disclosure, but not consistently capture the date of the abuse.
Is that because it might not be a reliable piece of information, or that it's not a question routinely asked?
Both. So we're going to take the opportunity when we replace our current child protection case management system with a new one to structure the system and the data fields to enable us to solve the system problem, ask the right question, and then of course there remains in some cases the inability to really pin down the date of historic abuse.
In order to do that, you can do it from your own resources without needing to go to another agency?
We can do it from our own resources, yeah.
Are there any impediments that you see other than the one you've mentioned, given that you've got a new IT platform coming up?
No.
Thank you. No. Ms Peake?
So similarly, Victoria very supportive of the proposed data set and has been quite influential in how we've been thinking about improving our own data collections, analysis, reporting systems and public reporting. We have been doing a lot of work on our critical client information system, but also the actual critical incident reporting that is required of our funded agencies. And we think that when we move to a new system from the middle of this year, which is much more focused on the nature of, or the seriousness of the impact on a young person in our care of any allegation or any harm they've experienced, that we'll have a better data set to be able to contribute into a national arena. Like Mr Coutts-Trotter, we would certainly see that the first and foremost priority for that national work needs to be a focus on children in out-of-home care and particularly abuse of children in out-of-home care as the highest priority. We've also, in the meantime, been improving our data analytics through some pretty agile, simple improvements to our business systems to enable there to be better interrogation of the data to distill, including from free text fields, relevant information which before had been quite opaque to us. And we see that not only as being important for public accountability, and we absolutely see it as important for that purpose, but fundamentally important to ensure that we follow up where there is harm that has been alleged or caused, so that we can support young people in our care effectively.
Do you collect that data now?
We do. As I say, we're improving our ability to then extract it, distill it and report on it.
So the question is the system by which you extract it rather than the fact that you
collection.
Have that material.
Correct.
So impediments to you are of a technical nature?
That's right. I think it is fair to say that it is always the case that you've got to be continually reinforcing the practice to ensure that all of the information is routinely collected, but certainly the nature of the information sought is encompassed in the both system and protocols and practice guidelines that operate in our jurisdiction.
to be able to extract it and analyse it, what do you need to do?
Yeah, so this new technology that we're using that is really using sort of predictive analytics capability or cognitive computing capability to do word searches and to extract information has got a huge amount of promise for us. And I think the second thing that we are doing is trying to get much sharper about our critical incident reporting system and what we're asking our agencies to report to us. So to give you a bit of a sense of that, at the moment we get 33,000 critical incidents reported a year. It's a bit like the previous conversation about reports to child protection. You can lose the wood for the trees when you have that volume of reporting within which there's a lot of just incidents that should be routinely followed up at an agency level. So we are moving to a system where the focus is on impact and harm, and of course sexual abuse and sexual exploitation would be first and foremost in that, separately identifiable, a focus on both where a child was at the time of the incident and the report. And then the last thing that we're trying to build in more explicitly is not only any other surrounding information around characteristics of that child or young person, for example, alcohol and drug usage or mental health conditions, but actually what services have been provided in response. And I think that's one of the things in this data set we'll need to be quite clear about for a national data set. How much are we focusing on underlying characteristics and how much are we focusing on service response?
From what you've said, there doesn't seem to be any significant impediment to this being put into effect.
Look, I wouldn't underestimate that system, IT system. It is a real one, and
but you nevertheless have the data. It's a question of a system that enables you to properly use it.
Correct, and I do think that there's a body of work, another technical body of work to make sure definitions are comparable across jurisdictions, and we know that that's something that has bedevilled ROG's reporting in the past. So I don't want to sound like Pollyanna here. I think there is a significant body of work, technical work, but there's absolutely a commitment, an understanding and recognition of the importance of this work, and we think over the last few years we've built a pretty solid foundation to contribute.
Thank you. Mr Hogan, do you currently collect that data set out in that model?
Councillor, we have had a look at what we do and don't count. We do collect much of the data identified by the Royal Commission as the appropriate data set. Some of the data at the moment is reportable data, so we can extract and report on it, and some of the fields that you've identified at the moment are in case note files, which at the moment we don't have the capability that Victoria obviously developing around being able to extract and report on some of the elements at the moment. We are also looking at a major project to replace our information system and to give us a much better reporting and recording capability and analytic capability along the lines that Victoria had described. So we're supportive of the model that's proposed by the Commission. We also think it ought to be a priority for the work that's done nationally with the Productivity Commission in relation to ROG's reporting and with the Institute of Health and Welfare. We are also then taking steps ourselves to see what reporting capability we can improve internally in the interim to align us better to the model that the Commission has proposed.
I take it that the minimum data set that the Institute of Health and Welfare began looking at in 2009 was something that Queensland was involved in.
I understand that's correct, yes.
And the work, as we were told, was overseen by a subcommittee. Queensland was represented on the committee or subcommittee?
I'd have to check the details, Council, about our actual involvement in that process, but we've been a participant in the processes to improve the data under the national standards.
So you've been involved in that process from 2009?
Yes.
What have you in Queensland achieved between 2009 and the beginning of 2017?
We do have some limited reporting, which we is part of our performance reporting on a quarterly basis, where we report two elements relevant to what the Commission has identified.
Is it the case that before 2009 you didn't report that information?
Council, I'd have to check what was reported before 2009.
my question goes to what Queensland has done since 2009 to date.
Councillor, I'd have to go back. I'm not familiar with what the work has been done going back to 2009. I'd have to go back and advise, come back to the Commission to advise.
What period of time can you reliably tell us about?
I can talk to the period that I've been the Director-General.
Which is?
Since I've been Acting Director-General since November 2013.
So you can tell us what's happened in the last 3 years?
Indeed. So as I've mentioned, the analysis of what the Commission has identified and what we can or can't do. I've raised directly with the Productivity Commission our concerns about the incomparability of key data sets that are currently reported through the Report on Government Services. As I've indicated, we are scoping the replacement for our information system that will give us the capacity to report data such as this. We've also developed an out-of-home care outcomes framework, which we are piloting with service providers, which commenced this year.
Is that a framework that will give you more information so that you will then have a better data model to go on with?
It will in time, yes. It will include data at a child level, at a service level and an organisation or level.
So what you're piloting is not related to data?
No, it is. It does provide an outcomes framework. It goes to the point that Victoria made about a focus on impact and for the child or young person and whether they are safer.
But just to be clear, we're talking about out-of-home care data. Does the pilot you're talking about in relation to outcomes record out-of-home care data about outcomes?
It will in time. As we work to implement the framework, we're testing.
But what you're testing includes data about outcomes.
It will in time. That will be a further stage, Council, of implementation of the framework.
Pilot, I'm just trying to understand this, Mr Hogan. I'm sorry to press you, but does this pilot include data about out-of-home care outcomes or not?
Not in this stage, but it will in a subsequent stage.
But the pilot doesn't?
That's correct.
Thank you. What else have you actually done in relation to this issue in the 3 years that you've been in place?
So we have continued to report what we do on a quarterly basis at the moment about child abuse experienced by children in out-of-home care. And
that's what you've always done effectively? That's part of the role of the organisation, is to annually report that data?
We report it on a quarterly basis as well as annually.
I beg your pardon, quarterly report it. And that's reporting it to the Institute?
So we report through the Institute, but we also report publicly on our own website, on our performance website.
Thank you. Ms Taylor, can I ask you what South Australia's done since 2009?
So this was the subject of a lot of investigation through the Island Royal Commission as well. In relation to we've got a number of the same issues that the other jurisdictions have mentioned. So there's a lot of information within our system. We originally leveraged off the Victorian system, and that's at the heart of our client management system. One of our challenges is then how we actually extract that data in a meaningful way to be able to answer some of those critical elements. And one of the practical challenges we have at the moment is actually being able to link the allegation, around child sexual abuse with the placement. But it now looks like we've been able to resolve that, and we'll be able to report on that in the Report on Government Services for 16-17. Probably the biggest two things that I think South Australia has done in recent times to really look at the whole question is the passage of the data sharing information legislation late last year, and now the establishment also of the Office of Data Analytics in Premier and Cabinet. We also are needing to look at a new system. We're currently reviewing our current system. One of the challenges that every jurisdiction has is that they were originally designed as client management systems rather than performance management systems. And so we've all spent a lot of time trying to leverage as much as we can out of our old systems. And it's clear, and following the New South Wales advice, that we actually need different capability going forward. So I think to summarise what we've done since 2009. I think we've obviously had a recent Royal Commission that's looked at this issue. We've had the passage of critical data sharing legislation. We've got the establishment of the Office of Data Analytics. We've been able to work through the outstanding issues that we'd had about why we couldn't report on a couple of measures in the ROGs, which will be remedied for 16-17. And I think our real challenge going forward is a future-facing system. And also picking up the comments from Victoria, how we also accompany that with good practice changes that actually mean that we don't just say, you know, what and who said this to us, but we accurately reflect, you know, what were the circumstances and all of that.
So is it the case that you have data available to you, albeit difficult to extract, that covers these 6 points?
I think we've got data that's difficult to extract in the body of our system. It would really require things like, at the moment, manual extraction, case reading to extract it. We're going to watch with great interest where Victoria's going, because that sort of capability may transform where we're all going.
So in terms of these details set out, that is, let's take number 3 for an example, you're confident that in the work that your caseworkers and others do, that they keep that material, albeit perhaps in a written form on it?
I'd never give you an absolute answer to any question, because one of the things we're talking about is humans, and they're working through complex and demanding work. So, you know, we would certainly say that, you know, it needs to reflect the type of placement and what was the location of that, but I would not give you an absolute guarantee.
I wasn't seeking one, you'll be pleased to know, Ms Taylor. In relation to this material, you would hope that it would be kept by your caseworkers because it would be within your expectation and probably theirs that this should be kept. Whether it is kept on each occasion, you can't tell us.
That's right. And like the Queensland experience, a great deal of ours is down in critical case notes and file notes. And I think for us, one of the things we need to do is really bridge that gap so that we can actually extract that information in a material way.
Do you consider it a priority given everything else that you're doing in South Australia at the moment?
We regard the information sharing and being able to account for what difference we're making to be a critical priority.
And you say you're following Victoria. Is that because of your geographical connection or for some other reason?
Really practical reason. Our original client management system is an offshoot of a very early Victorian system.
Thank you. Ms White?
To your question of what we've been doing since 2009, without being able to cover every detail, I'll try and give you the most relevant. We've made a number of changes to our case management system to allow us to report and participate in the national reporting arrangements that have come forward. We have continued to make changes to our case management system, which is quite a cumbersome system. It's growing to the point where the data available in it and what we'd like to extract is not a comfortable marriage, like many of my colleagues have just outlined. We're in those early beginnings of scoping what a new system needs to be and build, and to be buy a product or build a product. That's a much longer term aspiration, but we're well in project management to bring that to realisation. Like Queensland, but perhaps at a different point, we've implemented an outcomes framework for children in care, which has required us to do a number of things, including right at the beginning and actually develop a needs assessment tool of children in out-of-home care, which brings us to quite a granular level at an individual basis for a child. But it has given us that capability to aggregate those needs of children, which is incredibly useful in terms of ongoing improvements, but also to identify the therapeutic needs of children in care, as an example, at an aggregated and geographical level. We didn't have that capability previously.
Do you have the information here, albeit in an unextracted form, from these 6 points?
A couple of things we probably don't have to the degree the model outlines is the information with regards to the perpetrator, often because it's not available. A lot of our work and data entries focused on the experience of the child rather than the demographic of the perpetrator. Depending on what was meant specifically by mental health would be the other point where WA would seek clarification. We have an individual health and mental health plan for each child in care, but in terms of recording diagnosis and so on and so forth, that's at an individual file level and not always a complete picture, and can be a moving feast, as you would appreciate. That would be a couple of the areas where that would be hard to sort of enact at this current point. We would need to make some further changes.
How far off are you a new IT system that would permit you to do the various things you've spoken of?
Look, we're some years off, and it will also depend on our success with attracting the right resource to deliver it. But we are at, I think, it's a really useful point because we can look to other jurisdictions. We are getting clearer through Royal Commission, other national reporting about what is required. We think we overcooked our last system, for want of a better expression. We've tried to drive case management through a system where, as some of the other panel members have touched on, we're always trying to balance the need for professionals to do the work in a responsive way to the kids and families and the need to report, and it is a fine balance. And we want a system that's intuitive to that, but also delivers on the accountability that we must bring forward in terms of our data and accounting.
Ms Bennett, I take it you'd tell us that until the states worked out what data they could collect, what definitions, etc., they'd use, the Institute can't do very much.
That's my understanding. They'd need to be able to pull it from the... I mean, the Institute also uses some other national data sets that are available, but it needs to be able to draw down on the data sets that the states would have.
Thank you. Tasmania?
At the risk of being repetitive, I am in a very similar situation to my Victorian and South Australian colleagues in that we have a child protection information system that would support the model that's been presented under these 6 points. And we are also seeing a coming to the end of the life for that system. It was built in Tasmania some years ago, and it was built predominantly for client record keeping. It was not built with the capacity for interrogation or even the extraction of intelligence, although we have, I believe the expression is, sweated the asset substantially to get that sort of information out of it. But we are commencing the development of a specification to go out to the market for a replacement system, and in particular, as well as giving us that capacity to better assess risk internally so that we can red flag particular children who have got the physical or behavioural signs of being victims of sexual abuse in the absence of a report. We also need to be able to communicate electronically with the data systems in police and education so that we're not reliant on someone actually making a report. This information can be linked through a proper data linkage process, and these children can be brought to our attention so that we can focus our efforts on the children that are most at risk. The only other issues I'd raise would be with the dot point 3, similar to my colleague. We have some challenges with the quality of data around the demographic issues, particularly around Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander backgrounds, but we are putting in a major effort into the quality of that data in our existing system as a way of improving work practice, and that goes to the potential subjectivity of assessment for disability and mental health as well.
Mr Dave?
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm pleased to report to the Commission that the ACT made good progress in this regard, partially driven off a response to the Public Advocate 2012 and the Auditor General's 2013 examinations of the child protection system. We have in the ACT a 17-year-old legacy system, like many other jurisdictions, fraught with the same issues that you have already had described to you. But we have moved on this matter. We visited New South Wales, in particular looked at their child story system. We've liaised with Western Australia and the Northern Territory in relation to their issues with the same legacy system as we have in the ACT. We have taken this to market via an open request for proposal. We attracted 8 companies to that and have let a contract to a company for a new system, which we believe will address many of the issues that have been raised, and in particular points 1 to 6 from the Commission. We expect that system to be operational in March 2018.
Thank you. Ms Kerr?
The Northern Territory is in a similar position to Tasmania. We have an end-of-life system that's actually owned by another agency. Territory Families, or the then Children and Families, or Child Protection Function, only became an independent agency in 2010. And Territory Families, obviously, in September last year. So there's been a project for, I think, at least 2 years of mapping the requirements for a new system. That now has the addition of needing to integrate a youth justice system into the program, because that system we use is currently with corrections. So there's
Is currently
with corrections.
Thank you.
So we have some significant challenges there. In saying that, the numbers involved are probably not so high that if there was a requirement, we couldn't undergo a manual process. We have mapped the gaps of the 6 points against what we currently collect, and where we don't collect data, it would be collected by other agencies, particularly police. So with negotiation and agreement in that capacity, it is possible. Territory Families also, as part of the rebuilding and the new agency, is recruiting to a Chief Information Officer, a Chief Data Officer, performance and data management function. So those roles and functions will be key to us to be able to move ahead in this area.
Thank you. Ms Peake, Victoria has long had a strong NGO sector that's provided out-of-home care, that's right? Correct. In terms of keeping the data that we're speaking of, you would be relying on those NGOs to provide you with the data initially?
That's right. So there's about 88 agencies that provide data to us through both the critical incident reporting system that I mentioned earlier, and like other jurisdictions, we also have an outcomes framework that we're in our second round of running the data through. So you're absolutely correct that through our service agreements, we create expectations with those agencies for
So do you
their data
need a
collection.
very compatible IT
That's right.
system with each of those 80-odd agencies?
That's right. So really since the mid-2000s, we've had companion pieces. We have an internal information system, which like other jurisdictions is predominantly focused on client management, and we have invested in support to the funded agencies for interoperability to their client information systems as well.
Mr Cootes-Trotter, you said that you're moving from your kids system to, I think, Child Story.
Yes.
As part of that process, are you engaging with the NGOs that provide these services in New South Wales so as the systems interface?
Very greatly. So there's been about a 2-year process of design involving internal staff and non-government partners. The first release of the system is due in October this year, and the next early the following year. And the second release is really the release aimed at creating a shared platform with non-government partners.
Thank you. You and I have nothing further for this panel.
I have one question that I'd like to ask, and any member of the panel could answer it. Referring to the document on the screen, if you look at the last dot point of item 2, it refers to the relationship of the perpetrator to the victim. And then if you go to item 5, data should be used to monitor treatment and support provided in life outcomes. As each of the states and territories know, and probably the Commonwealth as well, child-on-child abuse is a big issue. And perpetrators in those instances, who are also within the out-of-home care system on this reporting basis, are dealt with differently, and there's strong measures in place in some places to deal with what are harmful behaviours. Now, the data is victim-oriented, but in the case of child perpetrators, the way in which Five would operate, I would have thought would have been important. Do any of you have any reflections on those remarks I've made?
Okay, thank you. So, with our child protection practice, we would view a child exhibiting sexually harmful behaviours and hurting another child as a child at risk of significant harm themselves. So our child protection practitioners would provide 2 reports to us in respect of those 2 children, and in our data capture, those, if substantiated, there would be a record of 2 instances of abuse in care. Now, of course, there's very good child protection practice reason for approaching it that way. Both children need a response. When we begin to report nationally, if one state captures data and reports it in that way, and other states don't, we will have a continuation of an interjurisdictional incompatibility. And I think that, for me, the lesson of the history of the data sets produced for ROGS is a difficult one, and there are some things that we cannot make uniform, but I think it's really important on this data set that we do identify the minimum necessary to provide meaningful national reporting without losing the subtlety that good child protection practice requires.
You see, on my reading of these principles, item 5 is the only one with a significant time frame because it requires data to monitor treatment, that's current, and support provided, that's current. But life outcomes is a long-term measure. Now, you know, that is challenging for any reporting process. I just wondered what you have just said, Mr. Coutts-Trotter, how that fits into it.
We are, like other jurisdictions, currently trying to improve the quality of the data we gather and the insight we therefore have into whether children in care are thriving or not. So we are piloting with 4 out-of-home care providers in the mid-north coast of New South Wales the collection of a range of data that include consistently delivered child wellbeing assessments, so psychological wellbeing, health, physical health, cognitive functioning, to try and identify the kind of leading indicators, if you like, of long-term life outcomes. So the challenge in creating these outcome frameworks is you are often describing desired outcomes that may take many, many years to manifest. And what you have to be able to do from evidence is then identify the shorter term indicators that suggest you are or you are not on a trajectory to a healthy, confident, engaged adult. And what we're piloting is our ability, 1, the consistency of the measures, and 2, the ability of a range of out-of-home care providers, including our own, to gather that data and report it accurately and in a timely way. So it is at a very early stage of testing the practicality of what evidence would suggest is the way to go.
Is your instinct that it is likely to be achievable, that longer-term data reporting? Sorry.
If I can, it's interesting, I mean, the issue about measuring life outcomes, our department's been doing some work and has done some briefing with jurisdictions. The tracking of the individual when they leave particular systems is that challenge. So it's either sort of, you know, a self-reported engagement and a survey. So I can talk a little bit about some survey work that the department funds. But we're undertaking in a number of cohorts in the social welfare system some actuarial work that's being done that's tracked the predicted life outcomes for people that are in the social security system. And we do know that children that have been in care, there are variants that go to that, but we can get down to granular information that would show that if there's 2 or 3 placements, or by the time the 3rd placement might occur, the life outcomes go to things like being on in the social welfare system, and then we can break it down to the type of payments, whether it's a disability payment or an unemployment payment or moving to carers. So we're just starting to get a backward lens of what's happened to people to have a better understanding of the factors that shape their future.
Not only the AIHW, but also in terms of child and family data sets, but also health data sets, to be able to get some of that data linkage to provide that longitudinal picture. And there's some really interesting work that the Annie Casey Foundation has done in the United States, which looks at how you combine experience data with outcomes data. And I think all of us really at the moment have been trialling outcomes frameworks that go to either professionals or carers and ask for their feedback on a child's outcomes, and how you triangulate that with the child's own feedback is, I think, somewhere that we need to put some more effort into.
What that leads me to is an understanding that you will be able, in due course, to make a cost-benefit analysis, which would allow for advocacy within the bureaucracy and within the ministerial ranks for front-end attention to children, and a far greater investment, because you know what produces the best outcomes. Is that the understanding?
And that is certainly to see what are the points and the types of interventions, early interventions, that can disrupt that predictor, and therefore that sort of cost, if you want to put it that way, the cost-benefit analysis. I'll just add to a point Ms Peake made, is that the Commonwealth also funds, through the Institute, the National Survey on the Views of Children in Out-of-Home Care. It is, again, I think it is important, whatever the arbitrary measures of life outcome are, the views of those young people are important to be able to capture and see what happens and what changes occur as changes are made into the system as well.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions? Seem not.
I have nothing further for the panel.
May they all be excused?
One of them, I think.
Only one.
I think Tasmania's being replaced by Tasmania, as I understand.
Tasmania follows Tasmania, very well.
Does your Honour wish me to begin this panel now?
How long will it take?
It'll take more than 15 minutes.
Well, we might take lunch and adjournment now and come back at what time?
2?
2. Very well, we'll do that. We'll adjourn.